Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this second session of our Ramadan live series, Knowledge of Self in the Quran, Ramadan Kareem. It's good to be with you as we come just to the halfway point of this blessed month. Alhamdulillah. Just wanted to remind everyone that Cambridge Muslim College is an independent institution of higher education and a registered charity. And the growth and success of the college relies on the generosity of our friends and patrons and supporters from across the UK and beyond. We ask that you please help Cambridge Muslim College as we work to train future generations of Muslim scholars, thinkers, and leaders to continue delivering educational programs like this, Ramadan Live. And you can help us in this project by becoming a regular donor, a friend, or patron through one-off donations, whatever the amount. You can also pay your zakat, which directly benefits students in need. Please visit cambridgemuslimcollege.ac.uk/donate and donate today, insha'Allah. So last week, we talked about the distinction between the ruh and the nafs in this exploration of knowledge of self. We started with understanding what self are we talking about, that there's these different aspects, and we talked about how the ruh is this pure spirit that is universal to all human beings, and that the knowledge of this is with our Lord, with Allah, and the depth of it is not possible for us to something that we can fully know, at least not in knowledge that can be acquired. And we said that because of this, that we need to understand the ruh and understand that we have the ruh and that this is our higher potential, it's something that connects us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that most of our business is with the nafs, that this is the part of ourselves that really we need to take account and that we need to purify, and that is the bulk of what we talk about when we're talking about knowledge of the self in action in terms of what we can do. And that the nafs is still something spiritual, it's still the soul, the spiritual entity, and that we need to know ourselves, know our nafs in order to know Allah, and that ultimately, in order to do that, we have to purify. We have to uncover this nafs in order for the light from the higher reality of the ruh to shine. And so the work that we're doing in building towards more knowledge of self is really doing this work of getting the nafs out of the way. And this is not an easy thing, nor is it something that happens once or something that you just achieve. It's an ongoing process. And it's a process of knowing our tendencies, knowing our hang-ups, identifying our desires, our imbalances, in order to discipline the nafs and to fall in line, the nafs to fall in line with what is better for us, and what is aligned with our higher reality or higher purpose and higher self that is accentuated or is in the ruh. And so this is why our focus is on purification of the self, of the nafs, to get our separate self, our sense of ourselves as separate, out of the way in order for that ruh to shine. And so you can say that in this quest for knowledge of self, that the self, the nafs, is both an obstacle to knowledge of God, and as much as it is a pathway to knowledge of Allah. The nafs really must be brought into balance and purified in order to obtain its beautiful nature. So it has a beautiful nature. It's not something that we see fundamentally or innately as negative. It's something that is beautiful, that has this beautiful nature, but that the beautiful aspects of it are able to shine when we are controlling it, disciplining it, and and aligning it with the fitrah of our ruh. You could say the fitrah, or the innate disposition of the nafs, fundamentally is beautiful, but in this dunya experience, it's natural for the nafs to be pulled towards the dunya and be deluded and be driven towards self-satisfaction. That's natural state of the nafs. Whereas the natural state of the ruh is to just be fully in a state of submission and witnessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we engage in this process of tarbiyah in order to harness or get control in this process of purification and beautification of the nafs. So when we talk about stepping on the nafs or killing the nafs, or this is yes, it's something that we're doing to discipline, but we wouldn't want to fully kill the nafs in the sense that it's not something bad, because it is who we are, it is us. So rather than getting rid of it or killing it, or it's about suppressing it and putting it in check so that the beautiful aspects come out. And so what I say is, in this, this phrase, know thyself, K-N-O-W, know thyself, that really in order to know thyself, we have to know thyself, N-O, thyself. So we have to say no to ourselves. We have to give ourselves boundaries and barriers and disciplining ourselves to fall in line with what is better, not assuming that we know what is best for ourselves. And so as long as we are in this dunya, we are veiled to this higher reality of our station as servants and our ability to fully be in witness. We can get glimpses of this, and we can get closer to being able to see through the veil, even while we are still behind it in this life. And so the Prophet ﷺ said that people are asleep, and when they die, they awake. And he also said, die before you die. So dying, which is losing our elusive sense of self as separate, is similar or aligned or parallel to knowing our real self, so that we are asleep when we are deluded by the dunya reality, this one-dimensional reality of experiencing ourselves as separate, where I am in control of my destiny, this perception, my will, and that I get deluded to the higher reality that Allah is the one that's in control and everything is interconnected and I'm a servant of Allah. And when we die, when we leave this world, that veil is removed. So we're awakened, but we're awakened in a state that is going to be determined by what we did when we were veiled in the dunya. And so die before you die means take yourself into account. And the death of the nafs is not in essence like the death, a bodily death, but actually allowing the sense of ourselves as separate to pass, to take a back seat, so that the nafs can be purified and be truly awake to its true reality, which is possible through the ruh that is inside of us. And so we need to remove the obstacle to seeing and being in the true self, and being in the state of ubudiyya, servanthood, and shahada, witnessing. And this process in this life, shaitan is not our only enemy in this endeavor. Like I said last week, shaitan is chained up this month, but the nafs is not. And the nafs really is the thing that we are always with, that we are always needing to put in check. The Prophet ﷺ said that your worst enemy is your nafs between your two flanks. Right? The nafs, like I said, while it has this beautiful potential when it's refined and purified, it also has the potential to be the lowest of the low. And indeed, our nafs can fully delude us and become our worst enemy, like the Prophet here is saying, to the point where we are our own problem. We can't always blame everything externally. Shaitan incites and whispers into us, but he's playing on our own problem with ourself, our nafs. And so in Surah Al-Nahl, Allah says, and Allah wronged them not, rather did they wrong themselves. So we are our own problem. This part of ourselves that inclines towards the separation, towards this veiled dunya, and this dimension of our perception of being independent. When we think we're on our own, we pursue our own end, and in a very base way, we simply go after our desires and impulses, which are a part of who we are, but again, need to be put into balance. If we let our desires and our impulses take us, lead us, then we can become the lowest of the low. Whereas if we put them in check, we rail them in, and we refine our character, refine ourselves, then we can reach towards this potential of the highest state of Allah's creation. And so this is about going against our own inner inclinations, and trying to weaken the pull that the nafs has on us, so that we're less susceptible to shaitan. We don't want to always make it about somebody else's problem. We have to take self-responsibility, and Allah has given this to us to take ourselves into account. And so in the Qur'an, Allah talks about, or Allah through the stories in the Qur'an gives us this idea of the nafs al-amara bil-su. Dr. Rania on Friday was speaking of Surah Yusuf and the story of Yusuf and Zulaykha. She mentioned Zulaykha. And in the same section in that story, Zulaykha says, I do not seek to free myself from blame in this, when she's pulling his shirt and they looked, was he pulling from the back? So she's caught that it was her inciting this. And so she says, I don't seek to free myself from blame. Inna nafs al-amara. So inna, indeed, nafs al-amara bil-su. The nafs is a certain enjoiner of evil. And so we have this part of ourselves that directs us and controls us if we don't discipline it. And we can confuse this with what we want and what we think is good for us, right? We think that because we want something, or we have a direction towards something, that we should follow this, or we somehow know what is good for us. And we can make our arguments to follow our own whims. Even we can delude our own self to think that we're doing something right, and we can put the blame on somebody else, which in this story had happened until she recognized and admitted, right? And so this is her taking herself into account, but recognizing that the nafs has this inclination. And so this is something that we, in the process of knowledge of self, knowing that this aspect of the nafs is something that's strong, that is constantly something we need to be battling against, and that has power. And so we have to be careful, especially when we think about knowledge of self in contemporary spaces, that in sort of a postmodernist where everything is relativist and people tend to define their own sense of self, of what is good for me, or following my own heart. We often hear this, like, well, I'm gonna follow what you know is right for you. But the reality is that we don't know what's good for us, and oftentimes we can delude ourselves. And oftentimes when we think that we're following our heart, we'd like to think we're following our heart because it's something that we want. We want to go towards this. But what it's most oftentimes is our nafs, not our qalb. And so we'll speak next week about the qalb, the heart, and how we can understand the reality of the heart, what is possible, and that it is possible over time to be able to distinguish between what is from shaitan, what is from our nafs, and how do we clear those things so that we can be, what does it actually mean to follow the heart versus follow the nafs? And so we need to understand, in order to be able to get to the point where we can do that work of having more knowledge of ourselves, to be able to know what is from us and what is guidance from Allah, what is, we have khatara shaitan, so whisperings from shaitan or involuntary notions that come to us from ourselves, khatara nafs. And so we need to be able to determine this. And this is why knowledge of self and this pursuit of knowledge of self is so fundamental, so that we can equip ourselves to know where we tend, what our tendencies are, what situations do we tend to have our impulses flared up and sort of lose control and be able to, and we're taken by ourselves, we're led by ourselves rather than submitting our will to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so what we also need to understand is what is our responsibility, right? So I mentioned this, not using shaitan always as a scapegoat, because shaitan can really only influence us through the nafs al-amara, through this part of ourselves that is not aware, connected to Allah, and trying to reproach ourselves and take ourselves into account. And so the first order of business is to really learn to suppress the nafs al-amara bil-su and to get it under control. And we do that by first having the awareness that this is in ourselves, right? We have to, Al-Ghazali, in his conversation of 6 M's that I spoke about last Ramadan, talks about musharata, understanding or agreeing to the conditions. And one of the conditions is understanding that we have this nafs al-amara that we need to take into account, we need to get under control. And so we do this by engaging the nafs al-lawama, which is the nafs that takes itself into account or reproaches itself. And so all these stages of the nafs exist simultaneously. They're better thought of as potentialities, and they're not linear. We move in and out between them based on our state. It is the state of our nafs, essentially. And so Allah swears by the nafs al-lawama. He says, wala uqsim bin nafs al-lawama. So he swears by the nafs al-lawama, and in Surah Al-Qiyamah is when he's speaking of this, right at the beginning, when he's talking about the day of standing, the day of judgment. And he's swearing by the nafs al-lawama because this is the thing that will save us on the day of judgment. If we took ourselves into account before the day of accounting. So while we were in the dunya, while we were veiled, what we did with our lives and how we took ourselves into account to change our state. And so we have to take ourselves into account, surrender ourselves to Allah's will, understand our will so that we can better submit it to Allah's will and give over our self-directedness and submit to Allah. So it's giving ourselves over to Allah. And in Surah Naziat, Allah says, and for those who are in awe of standing before their Lord and restrain themselves from evil desires, paradise will certainly be their resort or home. So this, وَنَهَا النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْحَوَى. So hawa is this desire that leads us towards, following impulses, following what our nafs is craving or leading us towards. And Allah is telling us that we need to restrain ourselves from this. That those who restrain themselves from those impulses will be successful in paradise. This will be our resort. And so it puts into perspective that is our job here, to be taking our nafs into account. And we can only do that if we have knowledge of self. Again, on this particular level, because there's the specifications of the nafs that everybody is subject to, that we have this nafs al-amara, and the more that we understand our own soul of how we get caught up, where are the snags in our life that create problems for us. Again, in Surah Hashr, Allah says they give preference over themselves even though they may be in need, and whoever is saved from the selfishness of their own nafs, it is they who are truly successful. So they're saved from the selfishness of their own nafs. So how do we save ourselves from our own nafs? Like I said, we have to discipline. We have to go against our hawa, against the impulse, the desires, against our whims, and align ourselves with what is better, based on what Allah tells us of what is best for us in the Qur'an, and what the Prophet ﷺ set as an example. And within those guidelines, we can discover more specifically where our nafs get caught up on particular things more than others. We do have these general patterns as human beings, but there's a lot of things that can trip us up and make us deluded by our own nafs. And so we'll talk more about this as we go on in weeks, but first we can start with the basics, the things that are known that can lead us astray. These are the base desires, food and sleep, the needs of the body. These are the things that when we focus on weakening the pull, we can decrease the covering or the veil that the nafs creates into allowing that higher reality of the ruh to shine. And so reducing food and drink and sleep, it weakens the nafs al-amara. In Surah Al-Araf, Allah says, eat and drink, but not extravagant. But be not extravagant, for Allah loves not the extravagant. So we have to, these are things that we need. So it's not about them being bad things or that we should completely refrain from them, that we should eat and drink. Allah is telling us we need these things to sustain us. And we can even have some enjoyment from them, but it's about moderation. And in order to be in moderation, it takes stopping ourselves. Know thyself, right? Say no to ourselves. This is how we begin to get control of the self so that we can bring forth the beautiful qualities of ourself. And this is where we can dial in the specificity of deeper knowledge of self by training our nafs. This is the process of riyadat al-nafs, of the training of the nafs. And this is, we're basically trying to weaken the hold so that these higher stages can come forward. And so this is why the month of Ramadan is such a blessing. It allows us to be suppressing these basic nafs hold on us, right? Because we are obligated to fast. And so we are able to have better access to presence with Allah, and insha'Allah also be better equipped to do the required process of inkishaf, self-awareness, and taking ourselves into account in order to know ourselves better. So when we remove these layers of our own lower nature by the dependence on food or the just sort of following our own whims, we get to know ourselves better and who we really are underneath. And so this month puts us in a position to start to remove these different layers that get in the way of knowing what's there. You know, we're weakening our hold on nafs. Shaitan is locked away, and we're getting closer and closer to be able to sit with what's left, who's underneath these different layers of the pull in the dunya. And we have this ability, this potentiality to be fully in submission to Allah. But assuming that most of us won't fully ever be in that state, we need to be constantly engaged in knowing ourselves better and better, peeling away these layers of self so that we can know what is in the way of us being able to be fully submitted. And these things manifest in our character, akhlaq. It's why akhlaq is such a big part of our deen, because the character traits that come forward are expressions of what is going on in our heart. And so we need to look for where we have bad character and work to improve upon it, refine our character. But this bad character is not necessarily a result of being bad or having bad character, because character is something that can be changed. This is why the Prophet ﷺ said he came to perfect good character. Perfect meaning an active state of teaching us how to perfect our character, which means it can fundamentally be changed. And just as it can be changed positively, it can also be changed negatively. We can acquire bad character as a result from being disconnected from Allah in the dunya. And this doesn't necessarily happen just from our own doing. It can be from experiencing difficulty in the world and our response to it. Response to the challenges in our life, it can be response to trauma, and this is how we respond. And then what we're left with is what we need to take ourselves into account. But we need to study ourselves, look to ourselves to know where we get caught up, where these impulses come forward, where we get stuck on things, where our nafs al-amara bil-su inclines towards things that are either ugly or not good for us, or bad adab. And so this is how we renew our faith, renew our iman, but also renew our focus on Allah. The Prophet ﷺ said, verily the faith of one of you will diminish just as a garment becomes worn out. So ask Allah to renew faith in our hearts. And so this is this constant turning to Allah, making tawbah, doing dhikr. And this is one of the ways that we refine our soul, is by constantly being in a state of remembrance of Allah, but also through acts of purification. Riyadat an-nafs means we are looking at ourselves, studying these places where we tend to have these bad character traits come forward, and understand them, study them about ourselves, so that we can act upon them. So this is where we learn to do this process of taking ourselves into account through action. So we can treat these things through opposites, right? So if ignorance can be treated through the pursuit of knowledge. Greediness can be treated through generosity. Indulgence can be treated through restraint. And so when we study ourselves and recognize I have this tendency to be greedy, then we know that what we need to do is to follow that up with practicing generosity. And so what we're doing is we're not just noticing ourselves and having knowledge of self. Oh, I've noticed by studying myself that I tend to be greedy. Remember, so I say knowing is half the battle. The other thing is acting on it. That we have to recognize this and then actively work to train ourselves. And this is fundamental, to believe that we can change. Because Allah tells us that we can change, and Allah gives us the domain to change what is within ourselves. And so this is where we need to understand that when we make a resolution to change a trait or to act upon this knowledge of the nafs al-amara, then we need to follow it up with nafs al-lawama, engage in this place of taking ourselves into account and administering consequences on ourselves. This is muaqaba. The consequences will help keep our persistence in our intention to change, And if we don't follow up on these things, it can corrupt our self-discipline, where we kind of just let it go, where we recognize it, but we may say, oh, well, it's really tough, or that's just how it is for me, or there's these external things that are making this problem. And so this is where we need to stay active. And so in thinking about this in this month of our fasting, and that we have all these benefits of being able to witness ourselves more clearly, I would like to encourage us to use this actively. So when we fast, I mentioned this last week, we can see our weak points, right? We tend to get irritable. So we need to use this time to look at ourselves. These are good indicators of where we need to seek more knowledge of self and unlock the secrets of our own particular nafs. Because there's all these things, there's plenty of things for people to get hung up on, but you may need to spend more time on a certain thing, whereas I may need to spend more time on something else. And that we only know by knowing ourselves and knowing what our tendencies are, where we incline towards. So we should be watching ourselves during these days, and particularly with food, since this is such a big focus of the month, is restraining what we eat and fasting. Make sure that you're noticing at the end of the day when you break your fast, notice how little your body actually needs. We have the tendency to tell ourselves, well, because I haven't eaten all day, I should eat lots of food. Like somehow my body needs it. But if you're listening to your body and you have knowledge of yourself, your body will tell you when you're full. And if you're full, then there's no need to keep eating. I know that it's difficult when we go to iftars and we want to be good guests and our hosts are bringing dish after dish after dish, or we want to, not insult our mother by not eating her food. So this is good adab to eat people's food and make them feel good. You get ajr for this. But just if you can't control what you eat, then at least be aware of where you got full. And notice, okay, I'm full, but I'm still eating. And notice where that point is. This is how you build more awareness of yourself, because your body is completely different from everybody else's body. Your nafs is different. And when you're on your own, if you're not out at an iftar and you can control your food intake, try to do so. Try to eat less. And for one, because this is a month about eating less. It's not about eating less during the day and then eating more in the evening. It's really about weakening that part of our nafs, doing this practice of discipline. And so let's make sure that we're making the most of this month, because it's really a training ground. Because Allah has made it obligatory, you now have this 30 days to practice and to train yourself. And this is why we're told to fast the days of the following month and continue throughout the year every once in a while, whether it be the white nights or Mondays and Thursdays, to make sure that we're continuing to get control of our nafs. And the food is something that everybody needs. So it is a basic way to, when we do this, it will bring forth our ability to know the deeper, more specific parts of ourselves. And so really use this as a training camp and stay vigilant against the nafs al-amara in this month. Also, make a log of things that make your nafs flare up. So begin to collect the data so you can know yourself better. While the things that I'm saying to collect data on aren't the best or highest parts of you, you do need to know these things in order to be empowered to change them. So it's also good to list positive things, particularly positive things that you're grateful to Allah for, but just be sure that you're not just focusing on being in a state of bliss or being positive about yourself, and really don't overlook or bypass those things in you that you need, that in us, in myself, that we need to take account of. It's our job to change those things. So use this month to know yourself better, how your nafs al-amara gets inflamed in particular, and the more irritable you are from fasting, the better this is, because the more you're going to be able to see where you start to lose your patience, where you start to be drawn towards. And do give yourself consequences to these things, muaqaba. So don't just notice it, but try this treatment with opposites. So whatever you notice, build your capacity towards the opposite. Okay, insha'Allah, I'm going to see, we've already got some questions coming in, but I also wanted to address some questions, like I said I would, from last week. So one of these questions was, with the nature of the nafs, is it accurate to perceive it as inherently predisposed towards goodness or badness, or is its moral standing contingent upon the individual's choices and actions? So it's kind of both, and in some senses it's a paradox in that the nature of the nafs, in its essence, because the nafs is a spiritual reality, it's something that is embodied in our jism, in our body, but it's also something that exists in a spiritual dimension beyond the body. And so there's an aspect of the nafs, when it is in a state of nafs al-amara, that it is inherently predisposed towards evil, towards separateness, towards forgetfulness. There is the nafs al-amara bil-su is predisposed this way. But then we have the nafs al-mutmainna and other stages, but the nafs al-mutmainna is the soul, the nafs when it's in a state of rest. And in that state, it is the nature of the nafs to be inclined or predisposed towards goodness, because this is the fitra of our soul, is to be in witness of Allah and to incline towards being in submission and in servanthood. And the nafs is part of that. And so it has these different potentialities. And so the second part of this, so yes, the answer is yes, it is the moral standing of the state of the nafs that is contingent upon the intentions and actions of the person. So it's what we do that changes our state, that makes it either inclined towards good or bad. And then there's another question that I think I answered this. What are some of the common pitfalls or challenges one might encounter when striving to overcome the negative aspects of the nafs? So we all have the pitfall of deluding ourselves, of thinking that we are doing just fine. And so one of the most important things that we do is don't leave ourselves to ourselves in this process. We need a third party or second party. I'm saying third because it's you and Allah, right? The third becomes this other. And this is why it's so important. The Prophet ﷺ talked about the mirror, that the believer is a mirror for the believer. We need another person to reflect to us where we get stuck, where we delude ourselves. And so we can do this ideally by having a sheikh, a guide who knows the deen, who knows the inner reality of the self, and who knows ourself to help us on this path. But if we don't have access and benefit to that, then we should keep people around us that are willing to reflect these things that we need to work on, and we should be inviting our friends and keeping friends around us that are willing to do this, and that we're willing to hear the not so positive things all the time for the sake of betterment and nearness to Allah. And then we should also, these are 4 things actually that Al-Ghazali says that we should do. Those are the first 2. The third is that we should listen to the criticisms of our enemies. So, the people who speak ill of us, rather than just write them off and say, well, they're crazy, we should listen to it. They may still be crazy, they may be wrong, but we should be listening to it so that we're not deluding ourselves or bypassing when we should be willing to look and discover and take account. And then the fourth and final thing is to mingle amongst the people and see what negative traits you find in other people and attribute them to yourself. Basically saying, well, if it's possible that they're doing it, where might I be doing this thing too? Rather than just saying, oh, look at how horrible that person is, where might I be doing the same? Okay, before I answer, I'm going to answer another questions that are coming in, but I just wanted to remind people before people leave that, again, that Cambridge Muslim College is a registered charity. We rely on our donations from friends, patrons, and supporters. So please help us train the next generation of Muslim scholars so we can do more of these programs every year, bringing to you. You can do this by one-off giving or regular giving, any amount. You can also pay your zakat. And so you can find all of this to do this at cambridgemuslimcollege.ac.uk/donate. Okay, so here's a question. I have struggled with countering my nafs and am finding it difficult to find motivation to continue trying. How can I renew my motivation and intention? This is a good question. This is something I think we all struggle with, is that it can get fatiguing, right? Because this is something that's ongoing, and we're working and we can plateau or we can lose motivation. And so one of the things that's recommended is to keep company of other people that are striving. So yes, it's about keeping company with people who are better than ourselves, ideally, right? So people who are at a higher station of striving or nearness to Allah, and they're really dedicated and they are beautiful character. The more that we're around those type of people, we will be more motivated to, because we're able to see ourselves in reflection. But also, even if they're not people who are better than you, even if it's just people who are committed to striving, and you can partner with them. You can, sometimes we, left to our own devices, we need community, we need people, we need to be with others to help us in this journey. And everybody else is struggling too. And so we need to sometimes lean on our brother or sister. Sometimes we need to be in partnership and devise ways to keep ourselves motivated. So whenever I lead groups of people and engage them in this, I always tell them that we should find an accountability partner. And so this is finding somebody who you feel you can build this bond of brotherhood or sisterhood with, who you're both willing to hold one another account and start to commit to, whether it's, if your goal is, controlling your food nafs, then you tell the person what it is you're trying to work on, and they check in on you. They keep you going. It's almost like a coach, but you're coaching one another. So this is really important. And then in addition to that, I'm not saying instead of, because you should still try to find those people around, but if you don't have them around, and or in addition to, you should look to the righteous predecessors and to see what they did in their lives and try to take on some of the actions and things that they did, so that again you are using your connection with other people to motivate yourself. And then just one final thing with that is to be merciful with yourself. So we're talking about discipline, and this can be like, okay, well, always getting on yourself, but we ebb and flow. The nafs is constantly fluctuating, and you need to allow yourself that sometimes you're gonna lose motivation, and don't be so hard on yourself. Be merciful with yourself, but that doesn't mean just sort of saying, okay, that's fine, you don't need to do any work. It means allow yourself to fall into the pit for a while, and tell yourself, I'm gonna pull myself back out of it. Like, and give yourself some ease so that you can um, sort of get back on the horse. You know, the idea is to keep moving and to tell yourself that it's not about attaining anything. You know, and sometimes we can get unmotivated because we feel like we haven't gotten there. Like I remember talked about this last week. So if we can remove this notion that we're supposed to get there and actually be here now and just allow ourselves to be where we are, pick ourselves up and keep going. Inshallah, this can be helpful. All right, I think we are out of time for today. Like I said before, please do keep bringing in your questions. They always help to make this more relevant to people, and I'm happy to answer them. And if I don't get to them each week, I'll carry them on to the next week. So thank you so much for joining me again this week, and I look forward to being with you again next week on Sunday at 5 p.m. UK time. Insha'Allah, may Allah continue to increase you in this month, accept your fasting, and may we all make the most of this last half of the month and really receive the benefit and blessings from this month to make us better for it at the end of the month. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.